trauma is going to change us. No matter what, it will change us. But how it changes us is determined by the choices that we make. During today's episode, we're going to show you how you can repurpose your trauma and let it transform your life for the better. Good stuff today. You're not going to want to miss it, so stick around as we get started. Welcome to the REBOOT Recovery Show, where we're overcoming trauma and embracing a brighter future. I'm Owens, your host. We're broadcasting live from the REBOOT Recovery headquarters. I am so glad that you're here today. I really believe this is going to be 15 minutes of your time that will be well spent. Today we're talking about repurposing and reframing our trauma. If you've ever experienced a mental health diagnosis or some traumatic experience, you know that those moments in your life, that they changed you forever. But how? How did they change you? What was the fruit of that experience? Did it help you grow, or did it crush you in a way that you've never been able to recover from? Mom used to say, let's make lemonade out of lemons. But many of us, we don't do that. We just sort of take those lemons and we put them in a box and we store them away until they get moldy and gross and old. But the question is, how do we go about repurposing those lemons, turning them into something good? We're going to get into that deeper and answer some of your questions today. And again, thank you for joining us. Lori is with me in the studio. She has hand-selected some incredible questions for us to discuss today. As always, if you have questions, email them to her at show@rebootrecovery.com or leave a comment for us on Facebook. Welcome, Lori.
Thanks. And thank you to the people that send these questions. Some of them, I know it takes a lot of courage to send. So we had a ton of great questions to choose from this week, and they're really hard to read even sometimes because I think people are being really vulnerable, and we appreciate that. This is one that really stuck out to me. We lost our child suddenly a few months after he was born. The doctors said that there was no fault of ours, but I can't seem to break free from the idea that if only we would have been watching him closer, he'd still be with us. I feel stuck. Can you help?
Yeah, well, saying that we're sorry for your loss is obviously not sufficient. My wife and I have never lost a child after birth, but we have had multiple, I think it's 5 total miscarriages, some early, some later. So on a very basic level, I can relate, but obviously not to the level that you've experienced. I would first say that to hear you say that you feel stuck, the fact that you even took the intentionality to submit a question to the show really would show me that you're not stuck. You are making intentional choices to move forward. And so right away, I would say just start breaking that language a little bit in the way that you talk, that you're not stuck. I think it'd be more appropriate to say that you're grieving and that you are in the grieving process. And that grieving process is not linear. I know everybody likes to draw it on a whiteboard with a nice diagram, but in my experience, sometimes we go through a certain stage of grieving, and then, we need to go back and do that stage again. And so I would just encourage you to not see yourself as being stuck. Grief is something that we've got to get through. A phrase sometimes when people have really hard things in life, they'll say, at some point you got to get over it. But that is not, one, it's not helpful, but 2, it's not true, because you don't get over things, you get through things. And we're with you as you try to get through this. And I know a lot of our listeners will be praying for you and hoping that things go well for you in this situation, that you can, find some redemptive qualities and some healing through this. But the thing I want to spend my time with your question really that jumped out to me is it feels like there's a trap that's been set for you of false guilt. And this trap that says if you should have, you should have and you could have, if only you would have done something, if you would have been more aware, more alert, then maybe this wouldn't have happened. And that is simply not true. Not only have the doctors said it's not true, but in your deepest heart, you know that isn't true. Now, that doesn't matter sometimes because the voices that we hear in our head, these attacks, these lies that we buy into, it doesn't really matter if they're fully truth or not. What matters is if we're willing to listen to them. And number 2 is if we're willing to let those lies or let that false guilt rule our lives. false guilt, the reason why it works is that there's a tiny grain of truth in it, which is usually the incident that occurred, which is, yes, your child passed away, and that is tragic. And so through that becomes a doorway for these lies to enter your life about false guilt. But the important thing is that it might be good to even write down some truths and to say what is actually true, which is that God loves me, that people care about me, that my son was loved, that I did nothing wrong, that I loved my child fully while he was alive as best as I could, and I gave him everything that I could. Write those truths down and say that while he's gone from this earth, we will meet again, and be able to remind yourself and maybe read that on a note card every day. When you get out of bed, spend some time reading that, because, these lies, it's like a little ringing in the ears. The more we listen to them, the louder they become, and it can lead to depression and all kinds of other symptomatic behaviors and things. So avoid that trap of false guilt. And then eventually what you're going to find is you're going to start, as we talked about in, some other times in the previous episodes, you're going to start actually finding some purpose through this. I can remember there's a story of a person I know in Missouri that lost their child, and they ended up, every time they find someone who has lost their child, they actually bring a gift basket to the house and sit down and say, we went through this as well. Can we talk? And that became really like a mission and a ministry for them. But you don't need to do that yet. What you need to do right now is stay where you're at. Let God work on you. Don't feel the need to rush through the stages of grief, but let grief happen. Grief is a God-given process, and God's working on you through it. So stay in community and avoid that trap of false guilt. And we are pulling for you. We are in your corner. Thank you so much for the question.
Great. We have another one, and this one says, it's a gentleman. He says, I've been a paramedic for more than a decade. I'm wondering if my job has permanently broken a piece of me. I don't really feel things anymore. I just do my job and go home. My wife says that isn't normal, but I don't particularly see a problem with it. The calls I respond to aren't my family, so I don't take it personally. What do you think? Who's right, my wife or me?
Well, that's something I don't want to get in the middle of. Who's right, my wife or me? I'm going to go with both of you probably are right, because I gotta keep our listenership up. Yeah. So we got to grow that. No, but first off, again, appreciate your more than a decade on the serving our communities. All of us depend on our paramedics, so thank you for that. The first question I would have is it working for you? It works, in theory, to say I'm going to leave my work at work and my home life at home. But the problem is sometimes our work life, while we don't feel things, we could say, okay, I'm not going to feel things at work. I'm going to numb that in order to survive. There's some survivor's sort of skills there. The problem is does that transfer into the home life? Are you able to feel there? Do you feel sympathy for your wife? Do you feel empathy for you and your family? Do you feel excitement and sadness and all those human emotions? If not, then yeah, there is a chance that it's actually doing some harm. It's harming the relationship or harming an opportunity for you to squeeze the fullness of life in moments. Because compartmentalization isn't always terrible, but usually what I've found is that compartment eventually starts to fill up. It only holds so many experiences. And if we're not careful, what can start to happen is over time, all those experiences at some point, they start spilling out. And instead of, sort of just putting them away, they start spilling out over into all these areas of our life. And it becomes a much bigger mess to clean up at that point than if we clean it up one at a time. On the flip side, I recognize that in your role, in order to stay your head in the game, there's some compartmentalization that has to happen, and it's appropriate. And it allows you to be good at your job. So I would say two things. One, compassion fatigue and burnout is very real. It sounds like that might be some of what's going on. But number two is to start looking, is the way you've been living sustainable? Is it spilling over into your home life? And are you able to still feel in that environment? And if so, and you're doing your job, I'm not sure there's anything necessarily wrong with that. And it might be a good coping mechanism for you. Probably makes you a great paramedic. On the flip side, if you're not feeling at home, then there's a larger problem that might need to start being explored a little bit further. Thank you for the question. Do we have time for one more?
We do.
Awesome.
And we're going to make time because I have the microphone.
Nice.
So this one says, I run a company and we hire quite a few veterans. All the time I read about suicides among veterans, and I want to make sure that doesn't happen to any of my employees, but I'm not really sure what to look for. They seem fine to me, but I'm not a doctor. What advice would you have for me to make sure our people are safe and okay?
Whew, that's a good one. Yeah, thanks for the question. First off, thank you for hiring veterans. That is awesome. So good job on that. suicide warning signs can be kind of tough to spot. There's the symptomatic ones, things like self-isolation or severe depression or anxiety. Obviously, if people start talking about death or expressing hopelessness with the situation, sometimes those can be a little bit more ethereal, tough to kind of capture. But a few things, early indicators, or I should say life experiences that sometimes will push a person who's already considering it towards actually trying to complete it or attempt it. There's a few that I say rise to my list that I've personally encountered the most. One would be increased substance abuse suddenly. If you start noticing an employee starting to use substances or drink often in order to cope to excess, that's a serious problem. Number two is if they've gone through a recent relationship problem. It's probably good to check in and watch them a little bit more closely. And number three is if they've had a sudden loss of employment, which could be at your hand, or even financial struggles outside of what they're going through. Those are very often stressors that contribute to someone who might consider completing suicide. But I also want to say to our listeners, a lot of times veterans might get even a bad rap for becoming, being seemingly more suicidal than everyone else. And while statistically that is true, a lot of our listeners know that suicide is not just a veteran problem. So this last piece, advice for everybody, there's a very simple method. It's called the ACE method, which really stands for ask, care, and escort. Ask, if you're going to talk to someone about suicide, be extremely direct. Say, I'm worried about you. I love you. I want you to be safe. Is this something you're considering? Number two is if they say yes, show them you care. Show them that you're there for them and support them. And then lastly, escort them to a professional who can actually get them help that they need. Wow. Amazing questions today. Keep them coming. Send them to us at Facebook or on Twitter at Reboot Recovery, or email them to us, show@rebootrecovery.com. We're going to take a quick 10-second break, and when we return, we're going to show you how you can repurpose that trauma and let it transform your life for the better when we return.
Did you know that the Reboot Recovery Show is completely listener supported? That's right. With great listeners just like you, you help make our show possible. So to give and be a part of the team, please go to rebootrecovery.com and help us reach even more people.
Welcome back to the Reboot Recovery Show. We're in segment 2 of our show. I'm your host, Evan Owens. Thanks for joining us, man. I'm still getting over how good those questions were. That was good. Thank you for those. Growth and comfort never coexist. They are mutually exclusive. I can't lose weight and gain muscle by sitting in my lazy boy at the same time. Right? I got to pick one as much as I'd like to. That'd be nice. Right? No matter how much I want to, it simply is not going to happen. I can't wish it to happen. Wouldn't it be wonderful if it did? Sure, but it doesn't. I can't become more humble through success. Right? Or I can't become more successful by doing nothing. You see, humility is developed through failure, and success is developed through hard work. And so I have to make those choices. And it doesn't work for me to simply hope that things change. I have to actually work towards them to change. And sometimes that's very uncomfortable. No matter what you've experienced, the truth is that sometimes, unless we're willing to get uncomfortable, we'll remain in a state of discomfort. And that's a hard truth because most of us don't like being uncomfortable. Maya Angelou once said this. She said, everyone gets older, but very few of us grow up.
It's true.
That means that a lot of us, no matter what we go through in life, we get to make a choice to either go through something and grow from it, or to get just get stuck in it. We can just let time pass by and we can get older. Or we can say, I'm going to work through this. I'm going to grow up. But it certainly will not be comfortable. The biggest blocker to our growth is our desire for comfort. Think about it. What in your life have you been wishing for or working towards that maybe hasn't become a reality? So for us, I want to save more money towards retirement, but I love eating out Mexican food every day.
That's true.
Right? Yeah. I want more time with my wife and kids, but I still waste time during the day shooting the bull with coworkers instead of just getting my work done and leaving on time for work. All of these choices is a choice for either comfort or a choice for growth. And it's up to us. But to make matters worse, sometimes, let's be honest, we choose not just does the comfort option outweigh it, but sometimes we actually make worse comfort choices than other choices. Some are just sort of semi-bad comfort choices. Some are destructive. It's not that they don't help us grow. They actually make us worse. Right? We choose the comfort of drinking or medicating our problems away. We develop bad habits to numb the pain. We avoid people that will challenge us to become the best versions of ourselves. But listen up. You cannot be the best version of yourself by yourself. You need other people to help get you there. But sometimes getting around people that challenge us makes us uncomfortable. But that's why we're so passionate here at Reboot about our Reboot Recovery Trauma Healing courses, because they're going to put you with a group of people who are going to help you take intentional steps towards healing. And that's why it's important. And some of you listeners who have graduated know what I'm talking about. Here's the thing. What if the only way to become the person that God intends you to become is through the suffering that you're experiencing? Will it be worth it? What about if it's long-term suffering? You know, God is a crock-pot God. He's not a microwave God. He's a crock-pot God. Sometimes he's in the long game. You know, what if it's even multiple generations? Meaning I'm going through something now that my grandkids or my kids will benefit from because they watched how I'm dealing with it. Mm-hmm. Or what if it's not even about me and my family? What if it's for a friend's sake so that they can observe how I suffer and they can find hope or healing, or they can find faith through my experience? Then the question is, would it be worth it? Would I sign up for the suffering? You know, so many times people have lived through hell and they come back on the other side, and they say, man, I wouldn't change it because all that I've been through has been worth it. And that story is so moving. But let's be honest, a lot of our listeners are not in that place yet. They're still in the valley and they feel stuck. But if that's you today, I want you to know something. One, you're listening, you're starting to take intentional steps. You listening to this is even an intentional step. But number two is you're not alone down there. There's tons of other listeners tuning in who have been in the valley, and the good news is guess what? They know the way out. So let's make choices for growth, even if it makes us uncomfortable. So what do you think? I mean, how have you repurposed your trauma to become something that makes you better? I'm interested to know what your experiences have been, what your thoughts are. Again, find us on Facebook, find us on Twitter, or email us. And until next time, keep moving forward as we overcome trauma together. Thanks so much.